When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers.
Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figure it out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Offers require port of number not currently active on T-Mobile network. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 40p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.
Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Nonprofit U, a forum where nonprofit stakeholders can share lessons learned and discuss the latest developments in the industry. My name is Valerie Leonard, and I'm your host. I'm a consultant to nonprofits, and I specialize in community and organizational development. I work with nonprofit organizations to help them make a stronger impact to their clients and communities, and you can find Nonprofit U on Facebook and Twitter. I encourage you to comment early and often using the hashtags NonprofitU, Community Law Project, or When ICE Comes. You can also leave comments on blogtalkradio.com/nonprofitu. The chat room is open, and you can post comments and questions. In order to use the chat room, you must open a listener-only account. You can find a link to open the account on the episode page, and you can also email me questions at consulting@ValerieFLeonard.com or send messages through Facebook and Twitter. You'll find a Nonprofit U fan page on Facebook, and the Twitter account is @NonprofitU. We'll be taking questions by phone and from our chat room at about the 30-minute mark. The call-in number is 347-884-8121. Again, that number is 347-884-8121. Today's episode is what to do when ICE comes knocking at your door. We'll talk about I-9 audits, ICE raids, what to do if ICE wants to detain certain people in your work environment, how employers can prepare, employers' rights and responsibilities, what employers can do after an ICE action, and where to find additional resources. Again, we encourage you to call in with questions and participate in live chats at about the 30-minute mark. The call-in number is 347-884-8121. Nonprofit professionals are especially encouraged to call in and share your stories and ask questions. Our guest for today is Jody Adler. Jody is the director of the Community Law Project for the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. I am going to let Jody come to you in her own way and introduce herself. So before she begins, I'd like to thank you, Jody, for being on Nonprofit U today. And again, it's an honor to have you. And we want you to tell us just a little bit about yourself and how you came to work with the Community Law Project.
Sure. Well, thank you, Valerie. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in Nonprofit U. So I am an attorney, and before I became an attorney, I was a community organizer in Edgewater and Uptown. And as part of my job, I was helping tenants in buildings go to building court to complain about the conditions of their buildings. The idea was to give the tenants a say so that not just the inspector and the owner were there, but the tenants could actually talk about the condition of the building. And I would sit in court while I took people down there, and I'd go, I think I could be much more powerful and more impactful if I went to law school. So I ended up going to law school, and after law school, worked for a couple of government agencies, but always wanted to go back to providing legal services to nonprofit organizations. And a job opened up at what was then called the Community Economic Development Law Project, which is now called the Community Law Project of the Chicago Lawyers Committee. And I applied for that job, and I have been here for over 20 years now.
Oh, wow. It doesn't seem that long. Oh, my goodness.
Amazing.
Okay. So on that vein, can you give us a little background on what the Community Law Project does?
Sure. So the Community Law Project is part of a larger organization called the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. And we are civil rights lawyers and advocates working to secure racial equity and economic opportunity for all. We provide representation through partnerships with the private bar, and we collaborate with grassroots organizations and other advocacy groups to implement community-based solutions that advance civil rights. The Chicago Lawyers Committee has several different projects. We have an hate crimes project, an educational equity project, a settlement assistance project. We also have a voting rights and civic engagement project, and then we have the Community Law Project, which is the project that I direct. The Community Law Project works to provide free legal assistance to community-based organizations doing economic development work and social service work. We also represent community coalitions that are seeking a voice to provide current residents at risk of displacement because of development with a voice in what's happening in their communities. We also represent low and moderate income small businesses and first-time home buyers and social enterprises. We do all this by addressing their business legal needs. So we help organizations get 501c3 status, create bylaws, review their bylaws, hire employees, address employee issues. We have attorneys who will represent organizations and small businesses in lease negotiations or contract negotiations. So basically, we address the legal business needs of our clients so they can focus on their missions and growing their businesses without worrying about the legal details. In addition to actual legal representation, our attorneys provide education to our clients. We have neighborhood legal clinics for small businesses where a business doesn't have to come downtown but can meet with an attorney in the community to have their legal questions answered. Once a month, we have an employer hotline so that we have attorneys who are available for 30-minute free phone calls from employers to address their employment questions. We have business legal alerts and pretty much try to serve whatever business legal needs community-based nonprofits and entrepreneurs might have.
Wow, you guys have really grown over the years. That's a lot of stuff. Right?
Yes, we are doing a lot.
You're definitely to be commended, and I can honestly say that you do a lot and you do it well. You know,
Thank you.
I'm a consultant, and I've worked with a number of clients, and one of which, you know, really, really benefited significantly from your services. You know, there was a serious compliance issue, and, you know, I always like to tell this story whenever I have somebody from the Law Project on, because I think people need to know that you guys are very accessible. You have access to some of the greatest attorneys in the city, and your staff is definitely, you know, right up there with the other attorneys that you from time to time work with. But we had an issue with compliance in which the client had not filed their Form 990s, and I know that's not why we're here today, but you know, I just want to let folks know. But there was a problem with the 990s. This client had not filed in 3 years, and they were in danger of losing their tax-exempt status. And we worked with the Law Project and another one of their partner attorneys who happens to be a tax attorney from a very high-powered agency, and we worked with them and an accountant. And needless to say, a bill that could have put them out of business, we were able to get abated. So I am forever grateful to the Law Project, not only for what you've done, you know, with this particular client, but, you know, helping me with stuff that I have to deal with, and I'm not going to go into that. That's why we're here.
Yeah, well, actually, thank you. And I will say that we have a pretty small staff, but we have about 300 attorneys across the city who volunteer with us on a regular basis. And so we have relationships with almost all of the large law firms in the city and some of the smaller firms and solo practitioners. So that's how we're able to do as much work as we do. Okay. We are able to tap into this big network of attorneys.
Yes, and then some of that work, now that I'm getting us back to why we're here, some of that work deals with employment issues, and we're here today to talk about what you can do if ICE comes knocking on your door. So we're living in an era in which immigration laws are being aggressively enforced. So, Jody, can you give us, you know, a frame of the issue, a brief overview of the immigration landscape and some of the main issues that we as citizens or we as people in the workplace, might, find ourselves. We think of this as somebody else's issue, but it's really everybody's issue.
Right, and that's exactly what I was going to say. You have to kind of have been living under a rock in the United States to not know that there's a newfound attention on immigration issues in the country. It seems to me almost every single day there's something happening. Since the election, I think that a lot of people living in this country, regardless of what your political party is, are aware of the fact that, if you're a U.S. citizen and you have relatives that live in other countries, they may be prohibited from coming here based on an executive order, or if you are a legal resident or here on a temporary visa and you travel abroad, you might not be able to get back. Children who were brought here as young children and have lived here for years but have not become legal residents may have some issues. It just seems that there are daily government pronouncements, and I'm probably exaggerating a bit, but that's what it feels like.
I don't think so.
About, who can work here, who can live here, who can visit here. And, there have been executive orders that have clearly indicated that employers are going to be, on some level, the first line of defense for a lot of this. There are issues about visa site visits, more wage and hour audits, I-9 audits. The Immigration Service has said they're going to be hiring 10,000 new agents. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, the acting director of ICE reiterated the mission to promote homeland security and public safety through criminal and civil enforcement of existing laws, and further pledged to increase ICE time spent in workplace audits 4 to 5-fold.
Wow.
Yes, exactly. They're taking very seriously this concern that American jobs are a magnet for illegal immigration. This is language that has employers concerned across the country, and for some people, they may also feel that this is language that's somewhat circumspect, but we're not going to debate that. I think that it's safe to say that, there are immigrants in this country, legally or not legally, that are working in the United States. The Small Business Immigration Coalition in Illinois says roughly 80% of seasonal agricultural workers are immigrants, but they also say that when some of these employers try to put out a plea to hire young Americans, they're not doing the work. In addition to agricultural areas, we know that the Associated General Contractors of America say construction firms can't find workers, and that's why they're hiring people who are coming to this country from other countries. So there's a huge problem, and I think that everybody agrees there has to be a solution to this problem. I think that there are some people who also feel that right now what's happening is that there is just fear kind of being imposed on a lot of people, and there are both employers, employees, family members, friends, who are just literally uncertain about what's going to happen.
So when we look at Form I-9, that's the form that's used for verifying the identity and employment authorization of individuals who are hired. So all of us have to fill that form out, right, anywhere in the United States. But from time to time, ICE, and when we talk about ICE, we're talking about the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, they'll conduct an I-9 audit. I'm sorry, I think I had a Freudian slip. I won't tell you what other word I was thinking, but audit. They'll do an I-9 audit.
Right.
So why would they do that?
Okay, so a lot of times what is happening is that because there's an executive order from President Trump that directs Departments of Labor, Homeland Security, the Justice Department, Social Security to review employment based on foreign worker programs and directives to remove people who are out of status unlawfully. The I-9 audit is a paper audit, so it's less personnel intensive for ICE. It is also considered something that is sometimes used as an introduction to doing a raid.
Okay.
The form itself is fraught with a lot of difficulties. I-9 reviews have shown that there are over 80 different ways to mess up the form itself, and there's a 55% error rate. Yeah.
That's simple form?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And I don't
that's just
know.
like voter registration.
Yeah, and the one thing that people should understand that are listening in, this form is something that has to be completed by every single employer once they accept a job. Every single employee and employer once they accept a job. And the employee has to provide 2 forms of government-issued identification that the employer has to review and determine whether they're genuine or not. So what the government has done is it's really put a burden on the employers to verify whether people are eligible to work in this country or not. And if you mess up, and we'll talk more about this, there are potentially criminal and civil sanctions that can be imposed. The I-9 real quickly is, the employee fills out part of it, the employer fills out the other. They have to be kept for 3 years after somebody is hired, or 1 year after the last day they worked, whichever is later. And they're only filled out once unless there's a legal reason to fill them out again. So an I-9 audit may be the result of an employee or that Homeland Security, which is the department that ICE is, the agency is part of, determines that there may be employees who are working that don't have proper legal authorization. They may be tipped off to that by another government agency who has noticed a discrepancy in a name or a social security number. An individual may have been charged with identity theft and be identified as working there. Sometimes what happens is an employee gets arrested and has a company ID on them. And they determine that employee is not eligible to be working, so they'll contact ICE and say, you may want to take a look at this company. Sometimes they get, sometimes it's an employee who is actually reviewing the I-9 forms and is told by the employer to not worry too much about what the documentation is that's been provided. And so that employee is concerned about their own personal liability. So they may become, you might call it a whistleblower, or you might call it a confidential informant, and they may turn the. So there's a number of reasons that this could end up happening to a business.
Oh, my goodness. This is much more complex than I ever dreamed. I'm thinking, one thing check, 2 things check, but it could be a number of different things.
Right.
None of which I thought about.
Yeah, I think it has to do with it does seem like a simple form, and I think that's part of the problem. I think part of the issue comes in if it's not fully completed, that can be a problem. If the employee and employer don't fully complete both sections. So there's a number of reasons. Sometimes you use an out-of-dated form, which also can be an issue.
Okay. Wow.
So unfortunately, there are a number of issues that come up with it.
That's amazing. So I want to remind our listening audience that you're listening to Nonprofit You. We're speaking with Jody Adler, the director of the Community Law Project for the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. We'll be taking questions from our listening audience and the chat room in about the 30-minute mark, so that's in about 15 minutes. The call-in number is 347-884-8121. Again, that number is 347-884-8121. So I think you touched on this a little bit, Jody, but can you tell us what an I-9 audit entails?
Sure. What an I-9 audit entails is it's an administrative paperwork investigation, and you will receive a notice of inspection from ICE or the Department of Homeland Security, and they will give the employer 3 business days to produce the I-9 forms, and then the employer may also be asked to provide documentation like a copy of the payroll, list of current employees, the organization's articles of incorporation or business licenses. The agents will then conduct an inspection of the forms to determine whether there's compliance or not. If there are technical or procedural violations found, the employer has 10 business days to make corrections. Employers that have been determined to knowingly hire and continue to employ unauthorized workers will be required to cease the unlawful activity and may be fined, and in some circumstances, criminally prosecuted. I think the process is that you get this notice of inspection, you turn over the I-9 forms, and they ask to see the originals, and then they give those back to you. They will then issue one of several different responses. They will issue either what is called a notice of inspection results, and that's a compliance letter. That's what you want. You want a notice of inspection results because that means they found your business to be, or your nonprofit to be in compliance. They may issue a notice of suspect documents. What that means is that based on a review of the forms, they've determined that there is an employee who is unauthorized to work. And they tell the employer then that there may be possible criminal or civil penalties for continuing to employ that person, but they also allow the employer or an employee an opportunity to present additional documentation to support the fact that they're able to work, to demonstrate that they're authorized to work in this country.
Okay.
Another option is a notice of discrepancies. And what that is, it's very similar to a notice of suspect documents, but it really has to do with they're unable to determine whether somebody's eligible or not. Maybe some people might consider this more of a fishing expedition than identifying a particular employee. But even then, the employer needs to let the employee know and give them a copy of the notice and have the employee have an opportunity to give ICE additional documentation. A notice of technical or procedural failures means that you have 10 days to correct those. And that, again, is like you either have like missing information on the I-9, or it may be on the wrong form, or there may be kind of a signature that doesn't, there may be something like, they can't read a signature on the form, something of that nature, and you have 10 days to correct that. If it's not corrected, however, there can be substantive violations. A warning notice basically says, we gave you the opportunity to fix these things, you're not fixing them, and there may be a monetary penalty if you don't comply. There's also a notice of intent to fine, and that basically says there were uncorrected substantive technical issues where you're knowingly hiring and continuing to violate the law, and you have then either the opportunity to negotiate a settlement with ICE or request a hearing with an administrative officer. The thing that people should take away from this is twofold. One is that you are often given the opportunity to correct errors, but if you don't correct them, then there's a potential for monetary penalties and criminal penalties, and the monetary penalties can go as high as $16,000 per violation. Usually, that's going to be if you're really a bad player, right? That's going to be, they've been out before, they've talked to you about this, you're continuing to do this, and at some point, they may come and basically close down your business. And if you get this also and they don't close your business, they may restrict you from ever entering into a federal contract again.
Wow. Those
so it's
are pretty stiff. Yeah.
Right.
Oh my goodness. So how can employers actually prepare for the audit? It seems like it's something that might sneak up on you, but it does sound like you might be able to read some of the signs or be proactive.
Right. So the best thing that employers can do, and again, this is whether you're a nonprofit employer or whether you're a small business employer, is do a self-audit before you get a notice. What is recommended is there are a couple of things that are recommended. One is that you keep all your I-9s together. Don't put them in personnel files. Keep them together with the current employees separated from the former employees. And part of the reason you want to do that is because if you get a notice, you do not have to go pull things out of everybody's personnel file. And you also want to make sure that you don't open the door to letting ICE look at your personnel files. So if you keep these separate, that really helps. And if you consider doing a self-audit, there's a lot of information online that you can find about how you should go about doing this. Obviously, because I'm a lawyer, I will tell you the first thing you should do is find a lawyer to help you who knows what this is about. If you don't, and if you don't feel like that's necessary, what I would suggest is there's a Department of Justice document about what you want to do if you're going to do a self-audit that's pretty helpful. And what they talk about is making sure that you're not just auditing one employee versus another. You don't want to look like you're discriminating against one employee versus another. So you want the employees to know that you're doing this self-audit and the reason you're doing it, and that it's not in response to a government subpoena or notice of request. If a deficiency is found, you have to be very careful about how changes are made to the I-9s. And the bottom line is that if there is a deficiency found in the first section of this form, only the employee can make a change there. If it's in the second or third section, the employer can make a change. But you should never use whiteout. You should never erase anything. The best way to make a change is to have that employee, if it's the first section, cross it out and then draw a line through it and either enter the correct information or omitted information and then initial and date that. And then also do a memo that's attached to the I-9 that explains that you did a self-audit, you identified this problem, and you corrected it. The presumption is that the employer has done what they're supposed to do and the employee is authorized to work in the country. So what you're doing really is you're self-auditing yourself and going, oops, we forgot to fill in this part. We better fill this in now, but we want ICE to know that we're filling it in later. We don't want it to look like we pretended we had this all done to begin with. So that's like the best thing that an organization can do up in front. And they, have an audit memo attached to the corrected I-9 explaining what the reason for the changes are, the date the correction was made, and the fact that it was made during a self-audit before any notice of inspection was received. You never destroy the old I-9 if the employee is still working there. But that's the best thing to do, and the idea really behind this is that you want to get in front of the issue.
Right.
You want to make sure that if ICE comes, you've already identified what the problems are, and you've taken steps to address those problems.
Okay, so that tells us what to do before they get there. So what happens if they show up on your door unannounced? Hopefully you will have put some systems in place like what you recommended, but what happens when they're on premises? What are some of the things you can do?
Well, the first thing you always want to do if they're on your premises is to call your lawyer. I know that a lot of nonprofits that we work with don't necessarily have a lawyer who they can call, but I would say this is one area where you might want to, again, get in front of the situation and try to identify whether it's somebody on your board or whether it is, somebody who has a friend who works in this area or one of the other legal services area organizations like mine or the Community Activism Law Alliance, just to know that there's someone you can call if this happens. It's rare that ICE will show up for an I-9 audit without notice because, again, by law, they're required to give you at least 3 days' notice before they come to inspect the I-9s. But if they do show up, obviously it's always and even if you have the notice, you want to let your employees know when they're going to be there. You want to make sure that you have a location where they're going to be reviewing those documents that isn't open to the public or even to the employees or your clients. What you want to make sure, you want to make sure that it's kind of a controlled situation and that you are the one who's controlling it, not them.
Okay. So, in other words, you don't want to. Okay. Go ahead. You don't want to. All the disadvantages of not being in the same room, seeing each other talk. Go ahead, Jody. I'm sorry.
Right. You want to be able to control as much of the situation as you possibly can. And one of the ways we suggest you do that is and this is whether it's a raid or an I-9 audit, you want to make sure that there are identified employees who are allowed to talk to them. Not every employee.
I got you.
You want one person and one backup person who understands what's going on and understands the process, knows who to call when they show up, and is responsible for kind of exercising as much control as they possibly can.
I got you. Yeah, so basically I was just going to make a comment. It just sounds, and I think you confirmed it with your prior comment, you just don't want to give them free reign of the premises of your your place of work.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So assuming that there could be problems that turn up during this process, what might some of those problems be? And I know you touched on this.
Sure. So again, some of the problems are that the forms are not completed correctly. Like I said earlier, there's over a 50% error rate on these forms.
Wow.
Sometimes it's the wrong form. Yeah. Sometimes it's the wrong form is being used. Like everything else in the government, you have to make sure that the form you're using is the most current version of that form. So if you are hiring people now and you're having the I-9 completed, you must be using the form with the date of July 17th, 2017 on it, rather than earlier forms.
Wow.
And people don't know that, right? I mean, why would somebody necessarily know, particularly if you're working in a small grassroots, community-based organization, that the forms have changed. So this is your heads up if you're listening to before you fill out the form. Go on the website and make sure that you're using the most current forms. That suspect documentation was used to verify work authorization. That the Social Security card that you're looking at may have looked like it was tampered with. Sometimes you forget to do an I-9. I know that there are some business owners who I've talked to when I've mentioned I-9s. They don't even know that they're supposed to be doing it. You and I are both in the business of making sure that doesn't happen.
Right.
So we are, part of the reason we're doing this is to make sure that every employer knows that if you have an employee, they have to have an I-9 completed. It does not apply to independent contractors, in case anybody was wondering about that. It just applies to every employee. So those are some of the potential problems that can turn up. I think that one of the issues also that may happen is if the investigation determines that there are a lot of problems with the I-9, again, it may lead to a raid because they may feel that the employer is not properly seeking verification of work status, which may then kind of open the door or be a red flag that there are other problems going on or that there are people working in the business or the nonprofit that are not authorized to work in the U.S.
Wow. Okay. So along those same lines, what are some of the things that people can do to correct the deficiencies? I'm assuming that if they fail an audit, the government is going to give them a letter with a list of things that are wrong and give them timelines to make corrections. Is that how that works?
Yeah. So we'll go back to this is when you'll get that notice of discrepancy or notice of suspected.
Oh, I got you. Right.
Documents. So you will get that, and you'll have time to correct those things. And if you don't correct those things, then you'll look at potentially getting, a notice of fine, which is what you don't want to have happen.
Okay.
A determination.
So it sounds like.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a progressive discipline, for lack of a better description. Each time you get a notification, the stakes get higher for what the consequences could be for not complying. That's what it sounds like.
I think that's absolutely correct.
Alrighty. I wanted to remind our listening audience that you're listening to Nonprofit U, and we're speaking with Jody Adler, the director of the Community Law Project for the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. We will be taking questions very soon. We're into the half-hour mark. The call-in number is 347-884-8121. And I also wanted to take a moment just to let folks know that they can strengthen their organization's Giving Tuesdays efforts by participating in Webinar Wednesdays. And what Webinar Wednesdays is a set of webinars that will help people to put systems in place beyond, just a series of, marketing messages on social media. After the dust settles, you still have to make sure you're in compliance. You still have to make sure your board is helping you out and all that good stuff. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I'm going to be doing Webinar Wednesdays. I started October 25th, and I'll be going through December 6th. So if you want to know more, give me an email at consulting@ValerieFLeonard.com. Okay, so Jody, before we start back our conversation, I just want to check the chat room and see if we have questions. And I see two questions. The first question is, how long does a typical audit take? And my gut tells me it may not be such thing as a typical audit.
I think that's correct, because it really is going to depend on the number of employees that an organization or a business has, and it's up for grabs. I mean, they're going to depend on how much they're going to scrutinize your documents and how many employees you have. So I can't really give you a specific framework. I mean, we know that you get 3 days once you get the notice. You get 10 days to do the corrections, but other than that, it's really hard to gauge, when you're going to get that final decision by ICE.
Okay, so what this sounds like to me is this is not a process that the government is interested in dragging out either. We're looking at days and not months, to respond. So it sounds like they're looking for you to respond quickly.
I think that's correct. I also will say, and I meant to say this earlier, and I don't think I did. I don't think that we're going to see this happening to a lot of nonprofit organizations. I think they have bigger fish to fry unless they really have some reason to suspect that a nonprofit is not in compliance. And when I say not in compliance, they have some reason to believe they're either not doing their I-9s, or they have people who are working for their nonprofit that do not have proper work documents.
I got you. That's good to know. Okay, and then the second question I see, businesses been known to be shut down because of these immigration issues.
I don't know the answer to that. I have not heard recently of a business being shut down because of I-9 noncompliance.
Okay.
But it could happen. I mean, if it's a repeated issue of noncompliance after receiving warnings, they certainly can shut down the business. I mean, basically, you could find yourself having to let go of whoever you are employing that doesn't have the proper authorization to work, and potentially losing federal contracts. So it could certainly happen.
And then I look at the fines. Did you say $15,000 per employee that doesn't comply?
It can be, but they really do look at, again, that's not going to happen the first time there's a noncompliance issue.
I got you. Okay.
There's a scale, and the scale just goes higher and higher.
I got
so
you.
it's really something that's going to happen if you, for lack of a better term, kind of are a bad player and are not correcting things that need to be corrected.
Okay. So when we look at a raid, so on what grounds might ICE raid a business or a nonprofit organization?
Right. So a raid is very, very different than an I-9 audit. And a raid is generally the result of ICE collecting evidence using traditional criminal investigation techniques. So they have been watching your business. They have been maybe interviewing people. They have been gathering data from other government agencies such as Social Security Administration, Department of Labor, Wage and Hour, the Office of the Inspector General, and they're or again, through an I-9 audit, and the investigations have given them reason to believe that there is an employee or employees working for the company or the nonprofit that do not have proper authorization to work. The raids frequently result from, again, somebody who's disgruntled, who is maybe a high-level employee and is uncomfortable with the way the business is proceeding with respect to I-9s. It may be another federal agency that alerts ICE to the issue. They may be investigating someone because there appears that there's identity theft or something like that. But that's frequently how the raid begins. It's not the first thing they do. It's the result of an investigation that's been ongoing.
I gotcha. So you already told us what you can do, once ICE comes on premises, just to do a document audit, right? Are the same procedures in force for a raid, or would you do something slightly different, or are you more restricted once they're doing a raid?
Yeah, so I think this is actually quite different in my mind, because if there's going to be a raid, they have to have a subpoena, and so that they can't just come to your place of work and come in and start arresting people. Well, they can, but legally they can't. They have to have a judicial subpoena, and what that means is they have to have taken all this investigative information they've collected and gone to court, either a state court or a federal court, and presented it to the court, and the court has to issue a subpoena. So the first thing that happens if there's a raid, ICE will come to your place of business, and they may circle it. They may make sure that they're at every exit. They may wait out in the parking lot. But as the employer, you are entitled to go and ask them, number one, what they're doing, what they want, and if to see the subpoena. If they show you a subpoena, it has to be dated, signed by a judge, and it should have either the U.S. District Court or the state court on it. So you make sure it's a valid subpoena. If it's signed by somebody from ICE, it's not a valid subpoena. And they if they don't have a valid subpoena, and if they don't have a valid subpoena, they can't enter the private areas of your business. If they're on they can be in a parking lot, they can be in a lobby or reception area, but they can't enter a private area of your business. This is, again, why it's really important to have one or two staff people, well, usually two, one person and a backup, who know these rules, so that they're the people who, if somebody from the government shows up, they're the people who are talking to them. They know how to look at a warrant to determine if it's a proper warrant or not. They know if it's not a warrant, they know how to politely say, I'm sorry, but you can't enter the premises. And a visit can be really disruptive, but you want to make sure that if ICE officials come or officers come, that you've got someone on staff, whether it's your executive director, whether it's, if you are lucky enough to have HR people, whether it's your HR people, who know what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, and know to look at a warrant or not. So.
Okay, great. I have another question from the chat room. We have a question from Tamika Flowers, and her question is, if the employer is using E-Verify, is that enough to avoid audit issues?
Actually, it's interesting because sometimes they will, if you have I-9 problems, ICE will suggest you use E-Verify, and it should be enough. My understanding is that as good as E-Verify is supposed to be, it's not foolproof. So it is a benefit, but it's not a requirement. There is some speculation also that E-Verify is going to become mandatory. It's not right now.
Okay.
And for those people who don't know what E-Verify is, if I can find my notes, I'll tell you what it is.
Okay.
But it's a computerized system that is intended to be used by employers to confirm not just regular documented workers, but to confirm people who are working on different work visas.
I got. So it's a database that can be searched and you can verify information, it sounds like.
Right, but like all
to
databases, only as good as the information that's put into it.
Okay, I gotcha. So in a perfect world, yes, it should be enough, but in actuality, as you said, the data that goes in is only as good as the people entering it, or at the time. It doesn't mean that they're bad people. We all make mistakes, and you already described the fact that there are a number of factors that can impact the accuracy, and none of those factors you indicated has anything to do with dishonesty, which I thought was interesting.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so what happens if ICE wants to detain someone, while they're in the workplace?
Right. Well, unfortunately, if they have a warrant and they have reasonable suspicion that an individual is not authorized to work in this country, they can do that.
Wow.
Yeah. It's very unfortunate, but it's true. I think that they tend to show, so ICE tends to show up for a raid with no warning, right? No announcement. It's not like you get the notice that you would get for the I-9. And if they want to detain people and they have a warrant, they can ask for proof of authorized status to work in this country if they have a reasonable suspicion that the person is working illegally. Now, this reasonable suspicion, we could spend days discussing what that means. But basically what an employer needs to do, unfortunately, is kind of advise their employees that they have the right to remain silent, but not tell the employee they don't have to answer questions. So there's a kind of subtle distinction between that. So as the employer, you don't want to tell somebody not to speak, but you want to make sure they know they have the right not to speak. And that's true whether you're a documented worker or not a documented worker. They can arrest someone if they have reasonable cause to believe that they're present in the U.S. illegally and is likely to escape before they get an arrest warrant. They can frisk someone who has not been arrested if they have, again, a reasonable suspicion that the person is armed, and they can seize a weapon, and they can perform a complete search of an arrested person. The most important thing to do, I think, as an employer is make sure your employees know what their rights are. And really the right is they have the right to remain silent, and they have the right to request counsel.
I got
and
it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it sounds to me like whatever your rights are as employees or employers, they're similar. They're the same rights that we have as citizens in the event that a criminal case is being lodged against us.
Right. I think that's
what it sounds like.
Right.
Okay. Now, for us in Chicago, and then there are other sanctuary cities, and I would assume states, does that fact impact the range of responses to ICE when they do the audits or raids or want to detain people, or does that really matter, our sanctuary status?
Right. When I saw this question, I thought, I really hate answering this question. It doesn't really make a difference. basically
Wow.
what happens is, the city of Chicago has announced that it is a sanctuary city. What that means is, from the city's perspective, it is not going to automatically comply with the request to turn over information to the Department of Homeland Security or to ICE. It doesn't restrict ICE or Homeland Security from doing anything. It doesn't give any type of protection like that. In fact, there are people who think that, and we've seen this a little bit already, where declaring yourself a sanctuary city may actually be a red flag to target the city itself, because we saw that with the issues about federal funding, right? There is this issue about we're not going to give funding to Chicago because Chicago is a sanctuary city and isn't going to comply with us. Now, there's litigation on that. I think that organizations that have declared themselves sanctuary really need to understand that there's nothing legal that means. That doesn't mean anything legal.
Okay.
Now,
so that's more or less a philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're a church or a school or a hospital, those are determined to be sensitive areas. And if ICE shows up, you can remind them that you are a sensitive area, and they are supposed to kind of, it doesn't stop them from coming, but they're supposed to do a little deeper of an analysis with respect to that.
I gotcha. Yeah, that is very disappointing.
It is. I agree.
Right. And I know you hate to be the bearer of bad news.
Yeah, it sounds good, it feels good, but I think it's really important for people to understand that it does not really mean much.
Okay. So, what are some of the ways the Community Law Project is helping businesses and organizations be proactive?
So, as I said earlier, we don't think it's very likely that most of the nonprofits that we work with, because we work with, fairly small community-based nonprofit organizations, are going to be targeted, but we do really recommend that despite that nonprofits take a look at, and small businesses take a look at their I-9 compliance and do a self-audit. If you have questions, we do have this employer hotline. The next date is November 16th, and there will be employment attorneys available to answer your questions. You just have to sign up, and you can do that on our website, which I think is on the slides that you are presenting. We're also working with a couple of law firms and another organization called the Community Activism Law Alliance to help put together a program so that business owners, not so much nonprofits, but that business owners who are worried about this will put together succession plans for their businesses, and we'll have educational material about that coming up. Another organization in the city that might be helpful is the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. They are available to answer questions from employers, and their number is 312-427-0701. And while we're not an organization that does this because we don't directly address immigration issues, we do suggest that if you're concerned for your employees or your clients, that you consider having a Know Your Rights training at your place of business. And there are organizations in the city that will come out and do those for you.
Okay. And MALDEF is one of them, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so in the unfortunate event that an employee is detained after an I-9 audit or raid, what are some of the strategies that employers can use to help their families cope and to provide support for the workers and their families? In fact, the employers may need some coping strategies themselves.
Right. I think it's really, I think this is really important to do a Know Your Rights training so people are aware up front of what their rights are. From the employer perspective, you want to make sure you have emergency contact information for all of your employees. So if someone is detained, you can notify the family members. You want to offer leave to affected workers so they can get their papers in order. You want to pay
Okay.
wages and accrued benefits quickly. And, if people are not able to return and you can provide severance, you may want to provide severance to people. But you have to remember that you can't discriminate. So you can't provide severance only for people that have been detained. You have to provide, if somebody leaves your employment, you have to provide severance for anyone who leaves. And they can also consider putting together a list of attorneys and or legal services providers to help the employees to be able to identify legal counsel. So the National Immigrant Justice Center, the Community Activism Law Alliance, those are legal services providers who are representing individuals who are being faced with these issues. And, Chicago has a wealth of legal services organizations, and it might be of benefit for an employer to put that information together for the employees.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Okay, so we've come to the end of our show, and thank you so much, Jody. This is Jody Adler, everybody. She's the director of the Community Law Project for the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. Before we go, Jody, can you share any parting thoughts if you have them? But most importantly, tell us how we can reach you, because as you mentioned from the start, the Community Law Project is really the community's lawyer on a very varying spectrum of issues. So can you share parting thoughts and let us know how we can reach you?
Sure. So I will tell you that there is a lot of information about the work that we do and all the other projects that the Lawyers Committee does on the Chicago Lawyers Committee's website, which is a bunch of letters. So it's CLCCRUL.org. So it's Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. So CLCCRUL.org. And our number is, I always forget our number, I'm really embarrassed about this, 312-630, no, that's not it. I'll give you our number, which is the Law Project, which is 312-939-3638. But I think the takeaway for people is that you just need to be prepared. Take a look at your I-9s. If you have things that need to be corrected, you may want to talk to a lawyer or follow the procedure I talked about having those sections corrected and doing a remedial memo. Make sure your employees and your clients know what their rights are. Make sure you know that they have the right to remain silent. Make sure that your employees know that if there's not a proper subpoena, that they cannot enter private areas of the business. You may want to mark some areas of your business private so it's clear where ICE can't go. And make sure you train at least one person and a backup on how to deal with immigration if they come to your place of business.
As you were talking, all I could think about was the fire marshals. Remember, they always like to have a fire marshal on every floor or every department. This is what happens when there's a fire.
Right. And one of the things that we didn't talk about, I didn't get to, is what happens if they don't have a warrant and they're on a public part of the business. They can, if it appears that an employee has given them consent to enter further, they can use that consent to enter. So that's another reason why you want to make sure your employees know to either say, I'm not authorized to talk to you, wait, I'll get the person who is, or not speak at all and make sure that they get that person, because you don't want to kind of open the door to letting them wander around.
Right. Okay, so thank you so much for that, Jody. Every time I talk to you or any one of your staff members, who are on the show, I always learn a lot, and this has been no different.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, so I want to thank our listening audience today, and if you're looking at the episode page, you will see Jody's picture. You'll see her phone number as well. I'm not quite sure which phone number, quite honest. honestly. It's probably for the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. But at any rate, there is a phone number where she can be reached. And be sure to tune in next week. Next week is Veterans Day. I can't believe it. The year just started. And we're going to have Dumont Moore. He's the co-founder of the Veteran Strike Force, and he'll be talking about the range of resources that are available to veterans. So until that time, I want you to take care, and thank you guys very much, and thank you again, Jody.
Thank you, Valerie.
All right, take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers. Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figured out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Offers require port and of number not currently active on T-Mobile network. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 40p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.
When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers. Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figured out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Offers require port and of number not currently active on T-Mobile network. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 40p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.